2 jobs for her comfort. One word ended it all. I never wanted 2 jobs. I didn't wake up one morning and decide that splitting my life into 2 separate worlds was some kind of adventure. No, I took them out of necessity, out of survival. It started slow, one shift here, another there. Then before I knew it, I was living in a loop, clocking out of one job just to clock into another. And all for what? Comfort. That's what I told myself. That's what I told everyone who asked. The first job was at a diner, a small place, the kind where the coffee pot never stopped brewing and the scent of grease clung to your clothes long after you left. I'd work the evening shift, running orders to tables, refilling mugs with burnt coffee, and forcing smiles at customers who barely looked up. My feet ached, my back ached, but at least I had a steady paycheck. The second job was the real test. I worked as a cleaner in an office building downtown. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid better than the diner. Every night after serving up plates of meatloaf and burgers, I'd change out of my grease-stained uniform and into something plain, something unremarkable. And I'd take the bus to the city, where I'd swipe my keycard into a near-empty building and spend hours scrubbing floors, wiping desks, and emptying trash cans filled with the remnants of other people's workdays. The hours blurred together. I stopped remembering what day it was. Monday felt like Friday. Wednesday felt like Sunday. Sleep became something I fought for, something I could barely grasp before my alarm blared again, signaling that it was time to start over. But I managed. I made it work. I had to, because the rent didn't care about exhaustion. The electricity bill didn't pause for fatigue, and I had a life to maintain, even if that life felt more like survival than anything else. The diner was routine, the office was solitude. The balance between the two was fragile but manageable, until it was. It started with the whispers, not the kind you hear in passing, but the kind that settle in your bones, making you feel like something is just slightly off. At first, it was small things at the office. A chair pushed back when I knew I had left it tucked in. A light on in a room I swore I had turned off. A door slightly ajar when it should have been closed. Nothing big, nothing obvious, just small, nagging inconsistencies that I chalked up to exhaustion. I told myself I was imagining things. Sleep deprivation had a way of twisting reality, making the mundane seem strange. But then I started feeling it, that eerie sensation of being watched. The prickle at the back of my neck when I was alone in an office where I was supposed to be the only one. The weight of unseen eyes following me down hallways, through glass doors, in reflections of darkened windows. I tried to shake it off. Maybe the security cameras were making me paranoid. Maybe I had read too many crime stories, watched too many late-night documentaries on people disappearing from places just like this. But the feeling wouldn't leave. And then, things got worse. One night while emptying the trash bins in one of the conference rooms, I heard it. A whisper. Not the soft murmur of wind through vents, not the hum of the building settling, an actual whisper. A voice. Low, almost playful, saying something I couldn't quite make out. I froze. My hands clenched around the edges of the trash bag, heart hammering so hard I thought it would break through my ribs. I turned, expecting to see someone standing there, some leftover employee working late. But the room was empty. The office was supposed to be empty. I laughed, a dry, nervous laugh that felt foreign in my throat. Hello? My own voice echoed back at me, swallowed by the silence. No response. Just the steady hum of fluorescent lights overhead. I shook my head, forced myself to keep moving. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe I was finally reaching the point where exhaustion was breaking my brain. I told myself that. I tried to believe it. But that was the first night I looked over my shoulder before I left. The first night I hesitated before walking through that dimly lit lobby. The first night I felt something truly unsettling settle deep into my gut, warning me that I should quit while I still could. But I didn't, because I needed the money, because I needed comfort, because I didn't know that one word would soon end it all. The nights that followed were heavier, the office air thicker. I found myself hesitating before swiping my keycard, my instincts screaming at me, but quitting wasn't an option. I ignored the sensation, convinced myself it was just the isolation getting to me. The silence of the empty office, the way my footsteps echoed in the corridors, it was enough to make anyone uneasy, but that nagging feeling only grew stronger. Then the whisper returned. This time it was different, closer, more deliberate. I was in the executive office, cleaning the long glass conference table. My back was to the doorway. The room had no windows, no vents big enough to create an illusion of speech, and yet I heard it. A voice, soft, deliberate. It spoke my name. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. My fingers gripped the damp rag in my hand, my pulse hammering against my skin. Slowly, I turned around, expecting to see someone standing there. But the room was empty. The hallway outside was empty. Still, I knew I wasn't alone. I forced myself to finish my shift, my movements mechanical, my eyes darting toward every shadow. My nerves stretched thin as I dumped the last of the trash bags and wiped down the final desk. Then just as I reached the exit, as my shaking fingers wrapped around the metal handle of the door, I heard it again. A breath so close it tickled my ear. A whisper so faint it sent ice down my spine. Stay. I fled into the night, my heart pounding against my ribs. But no matter how far I ran, I knew one thing for sure. Whatever was in that building wasn't finished with me yet. I didn't go back the next night. I called in sick. I spent the evening lying on my couch, staring at the ceiling, listening to the creaks and groans of my tiny apartment. It felt safer there, enclosed within 4 walls that I knew were empty. But the safety didn't last, and I finally slept. I dreamed of the office. The long, empty hallways, the cold glow of the fluorescent lights, the feeling of something unseen standing just out of sight. In my dream, I was trapped inside, walking in endless circles, searching for an exit that didn't exist. Every time I turned a corner, I felt the whisper brush against my ear. Stay. I woke up covered in sweat, my heart pounding in my chest. It was just a dream, I told myself. Just stress, exhaustion, my mind playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew better. The following night, I forced myself to go back. I swiped my keycard with shaking hands. The door clicked open and I stepped inside. The air felt heavier than before. The silence pressed against my ears, thick and suffocating. Every step felt wrong. Every shadow seemed darker. I moved quickly, desperate to finish my shift. My hands trembled as I wiped down desks and emptied bins. The faster I worked, the sooner I could leave. But no matter how fast I moved, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Then I heard it again, a whisper, low, teasing. This time I understood the word. Closer. I should have quit, I knew that. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to walk away, to never step foot in that building again. But I didn't. Not because I wasn't afraid, I was terrified. But fear wasn't enough to change the reality I lived in. I needed money. I needed to survive, and the only way to do that was to keep working. So the next night, I went back. The moment I stepped inside, I felt it. The air was different. It was heavy, like something unseen was pressing down on me. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flickering slightly as if they, too, sensed the disturbance in the air. I took a deep breath and tried to focus on the task at hand. Just one more shift, one more night. Then I'd figure something out. I moved through the offices as quickly as I could, trying to ignore the tension creeping up my spine. The whispers had been growing louder, more persistent. The shadows seemed to stretch in unnatural ways, pooling in corners they had no business being in. But I forced myself to keep going, cleaning one desk at a time, emptying one trash bin after another. And then, as I was wiping down the break room counter, I heard it. Not a whisper this time, not a hushed voice teasing me from the darkness. A breath right behind me. I spun around, my heart nearly leaping out of my chest. The room was empty, but I swore I felt something there, something just outside my vision. My hands trembled as I gripped the edge of the counter. I had to get out of there, now. But before I could take a step, the air shifted again. The hum of the lights seemed to distort, warping into something darker. A shadow flickered in my peripheral vision. I turned, but nothing was there. I wasn't alone, I knew that now. Something was here with me. The hallway outside the break room seemed longer than before, stretching into endless darkness. I forced myself to move, to put one foot in front of the other, even though every instinct screamed at me to run. My footsteps echoed unnaturally in the silence, as if the building itself was listening. I reached the janitor's closet, gripping the doorknob so tightly my knuckles turned white. I needed to get my things and leave. I had to. Then I heard my name. Not whispered, not playful. It was right in my ear, spoken in a voice that didn't belong to anyone I knew. Low, chilling, dripping with something that felt almost amused. I bolted. I didn't care about my cleaning supplies, didn't care about finishing my shift. I sprinted down the hallway, my pulse pounding in my ears. The exit was so close. Just a few more steps. The lights flickered again. The air behind me shifted. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see whatever was there. I slammed into the exit door, shoving it open with all my strength. The cool night air hit me like a wave, sharp and refreshing against my burning skin. I stumbled onto the sidewalk, gasping for breath, my hands still shaking uncontrollably. For a long moment, I stood there, staring back at the building. The windows reflected nothing but the dim glow of streetlights. It looked normal, ordinary, as if nothing had happened. But I knew better. I wasn't going back. Not now, not ever. Whatever was inside that office had made itself known. It had spoken my name. It had followed me. And I had no doubt, if I returned, it wouldn't just whisper next time. It would do something far worse. I had promised myself that I would never go back. The moment my feet hit the sidewalk outside that building, I swore to never step inside again. And yet, 2 nights later, there I was, standing in front of those same glass doors, my keycard clenched so tightly in my fist that my fingers ached. I told myself I had no choice. Rent was due. My bank account was practically empty. Missing more shifts wasn't an option. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the only reason. The fear was still there, crawling under my skin, settling into my bones. But something else had taken root, too. Curiosity. What had I heard that night? What had whispered my name? What had lurked just beyond my vision? The questions gnawed at me, kept me awake at night, filled every silence with echoes of that single word, stay. So I swiped my keycard. The lock clicked open. The door swung inward, revealing the dimly lit hallway beyond. The moment I stepped inside, the air changed. It was thicker, heavier than before. The faint hum of the fluorescent lights seemed deeper, almost distorted, like a sound coming from underwater. My stomach twisted in protest, but I forced myself forward. This time I paid attention to every detail. The way my footsteps echoed slightly offbeat. The way the shadows didn't quite move with the light. The way the air itself seemed charged, like the building was waiting for something. I walked slowly, cautiously, passing through the rows of empty cubicles. My heart pounded in my chest, but I wasn't running this time. I wasn't going to let the fear control me. But then something changed. At first it was subtle. A faint shift in the shadows, a flicker of movement at the edge of my vision. I stopped, held my breath, listened. Silence. I exhaled slowly, shaking my head. I was just psyching myself out. It was just my nerves. Then I heard it. Not a whisper, not a breath. Footsteps. Slow, measured, coming from down the hall. I froze, my own feet felt rooted to the ground. I turned my head slowly, eyes locked on the dark hallway ahead of me. The footsteps stopped. The air grew colder. I wasn't alone. My body screamed at me to run, but I didn't. I forced myself to stay still to listen. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Then, the lights flickered, the shadows deepened, and the footsteps started again. Closer this time. I turned and ran. My pulse pounded in my ears, my breaths ragged as I sprinted toward the janitor's closet. I didn't care about my supplies anymore. I didn't care about finishing my shift. I just needed to get out. The footsteps followed. Faster. I reached the closet, fumbling with the door handle, shoving it open. I slammed it shut behind me, my back pressing against the cold metal. Silence. I held my breath. Seconds passed, a minute, maybe more. Then something scratched against the door. A slow, deliberate scrape of fingernails against metal. My skin crawled. My throat tightened. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing myself to wake up to be anywhere but here. The scratching stopped, but the presence remained. I could feel it just beyond the door, waiting. And then in the thick silence it spoke. One word. Mind. I gasped, my body seizing with cold terror. The lights outside the closet flickered violently, casting shifting shadows under the door. I clenched my hands into fists, trying to ground myself, to remember how to breathe. I had to move, I had to get out, but my body wouldn't listen. A shadow slipped beneath the doorframe, thin, unnatural, stretching toward me. I bolted. Throwing the door open, I stumbled into the hallway. My legs barely worked, but I forced them to move to carry me toward the exit. The air behind me crackled with energy, with something unseen but undeniably real. The hallway stretched impossibly long. The door felt miles away. Then, a hand, ice-cold fingers brushed against the back of my neck. I screamed. I don't remember reaching the exit. I don't remember how I got outside. One moment I was running, the next I was on the sidewalk, gasping, shaking, staring back at the silent building. Nothing moved, but I knew it was still there, watching, waiting, and worst of all, it had let me go. For now, I tried to put it behind me. I tried to forget, but forgetting wasn't an option, not anymore. The feeling stayed with me, an invisible weight pressing on my chest, a constant sensation of being followed, even in broad daylight. Every shadow in my apartment seemed to stretch just a little too long. Every creak in the floorboards made my stomach twist. At night, sleep became an illusion. Every time I closed my eyes, I found myself back in that building, walking down those endless halls, chased by something just out of sight. When I finally managed to doze off, I awoke gasping, drenched in sweat, my heart hammering against my ribs. And then the whisper followed me home. The first time I thought I was imagining it, a trick of exhaustion, a hallucination born from fear. I had just stepped out of the shower, wrapping a towel around myself when I heard it, soft, almost playful, from just behind me. Mind. I spun around, the breath freezing in my throat. My apartment was empty. The door was locked, the windows closed, but the air felt heavy, the silence deafening. I forced myself to breathe, to move. I turned on every light, checked every corner, but found nothing. And yet the feeling didn't fade. It clung to me, an invisible presence lurking just beyond my reach. Over the next few days, the disturbances escalated. My keys would disappear and turn up in places I knew I hadn't left. My television flickered on in the middle of the night, playing static at full volume. My bedroom door creaked open on its own, slow and deliberate, like something was inviting itself inside. Then came the dreams. In them, I was back in the office, standing in front of the janitor's closet. But the hallway was different now, longer, darker, stretching into an abyss that seemed to swallow the light. My legs refused to move. Something loomed behind me, its breath cold against my neck. When I turned to face it, I woke up screaming. I stopped going to work. I stopped answering calls. I barely left my apartment. Nothing felt safe anymore, but it didn't matter. It had found me, and it wasn't going to let go. One night, as I lay curled up on the couch, exhaustion pulling me into restless sleep, I felt it. A hand, ice-cold fingers grazing my shoulder, curling slightly, as if testing the weight of my flesh. I jerked awake, my body trembling. My apartment was dark, too dark. The streetlights outside seemed dim, their glow barely filtering through my window. My breaths came in sharp gasps as I scanned the room, every nerve in my body screaming at me to run. And then the whisper, so close this time, right beside my ear. Don't fight. I leaped from the couch, flipping on every light I could reach. The walls seemed to press in around me, the air thick with something I couldn't see but could feel, deep in my bones, in my mind, wrapping around me like invisible chains. I had to leave. I grabbed my keys and bolted for the door, my hands shaking so hard that I fumbled with the lock. I yanked it open, stumbling into the hallway, gasping as fresh air hit my face. I didn't stop moving. I didn't look back. I spent the night in my car, parked miles away in an empty lot. I barely slept. My mind raced through every possible explanation, every desperate attempt to rationalize what was happening. Maybe I was losing it. Maybe it was stress, paranoia, a breakdown waiting to happen. But deep down, I knew the truth. It had followed me, and it wasn't done yet. I couldn't stay in my apartment. I couldn't go back to work. Nowhere felt safe anymore. The only question was, where could I go that it wouldn't follow? I drove aimlessly, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly that my knuckles ached. The streets were nearly empty at this hour, just a few cars passing by in a blur of headlights. I had no destination, no plan, just an overwhelming need to get away, though deep down, I knew that distance wouldn't save me. The presence wasn't confined to that office anymore. It was with me now, embedded in the fabric of my reality. No matter where I ran, it would follow. It had already made that clear. I pulled into an all-night diner, needing a place to breathe. The neon glow of the sign flickered against the damp pavement. casting long shadows. I stepped inside, the warmth of coffee and grease-licked air pressing against my skin. The place was nearly empty, save for a lone waitress behind the counter and a trucker nursing a cup of coffee in the corner. I sat at the farthest booth, my back against the wall. The moment I let out a breath, exhaustion crept over me. My mind replayed every whisper, every flicker of movement in my apartment, every icy touch that had sent terror ripping through me. "Can I get you something?" I jumped. The waitress was standing beside my table, pen poised over her notepad. Her expression was polite, but something in her eyes flickered. Concern? Recognition. I swallowed the lump in my throat and forced my voice to work. "Coffee," I said, "black." She nodded and walked away. I rubbed my face with my hands, trying to pull myself together. But then I felt it again. A shift in the air. The temperature dropped, the warm diner suddenly feeling as cold as the office had been. My breath hitched, my fingers curling around the edge of the table. I knew before I even turned my head that it was there. A shadow sitting across from me. I didn't look up, I couldn't. The diner was still, the trucker didn't react. The waitress poured coffee without a second glance. No one else could see it, but I could feel it, its presence pressing into me like a weight on my chest. Nowhere to run. The voice was just as I remembered, low, amused, patient. I shut my eyes tightly, willing it away. I knew by now that ignoring it wouldn't help, but what else could I do? My heart pounded violently against my ribs. I opened my eyes. The seat across from me was empty. The diner was normal again, filled only with the distant clatter of dishes and the hum of the neon sign outside. But I knew it was still there, watching, waiting. I couldn't keep running. I had to make a choice. I pulled a crumpled 20 from my pocket and placed it on the table, then stood and walked out into the cold night air. I knew where I had to go. I started driving, the city slipping away behind me. I didn't stop until I saw the dark outline of the office building rising against the horizon, its windows dark, the emptiness inside beckoning me. It had started here, and I knew it had to end here. I stepped out of my car, my breath curling in the cold night air. My body screamed at me to turn back, to drive away, but I forced myself forward. Each step felt heavier than the last as I approached the entrance. The door was unlocked. It was waiting for me. Inside, the silence was suffocating. The hum of the lights above seemed distant, almost swallowed by the oppressive weight of the air. I walked through the hallways, past the cubicles, past the break room where I had first heard the whisper. And then I reached the janitor's closet. The door was slightly ajar, as if inviting me in. I swallowed hard, my fingers twitching at my sides. I stepped inside. The second I did, the door slammed shut behind me. The lights flickered, then died, plunging me into suffocating darkness. My breath came in shallow gasps. Then the whisper, right against my ear. "Mind." Cold fingers wrapped around my wrist, pulling me down deeper into something I couldn't see. The darkness swallowed me whole. And then, silence. Days later, the office would reopen. A new janitor would take my place, unaware of what had happened. They would go about their job just as I had. And in the shadows, the whisper would wait. For the next one,